We're going to continue our series today, Go. We're going to continue our series, Go, taking the words off of Jesus, what he said in Mark chapter 16, verse 15, where he said, go into all the world and preach the good news to everyone. We're continuing this series talking about Go and global outreach. Global outreach is our missions organization, right? We support people all over the world and locally. When you abbreviate global outreach, it's GO, Go. And global also means international and local. So we're big locally and internationally, what God has called us to do. Last week, I talked about what does Go mean for me, right? What does Go mean for me? Not the missionary, not the awesome people like Steve Tiber or a pastor. What does Go mean for me? A father working 60 hours a week, 3 kids, a mortgage. What does Go mean for me as a student, someone retired? Today, I want to talk about what does it take to go? What does it take to go? What do we need to actually fulfill what Jesus asked us to do? And what I'm going to do today is read a story of one of the most famous missionaries to ever live. One of the most famous people to ever go and fulfill the words of Jesus. His name's the Apostle Paul. And early on in Paul's Christian life, he started taking some missionary journeys. In fact, on his second missionary trip, he went to a city called Corinth, the city of Corinth. And we're going to read the story of when Paul went to the city of Corinth. And the story's found in Acts chapter 18. So we're not going to go there yet, but I want to just explain a little context. Acts chapter 18 is the story. A guy named Luke, he recorded what happened when Paul took his second missionary trip, his first time in the city of Corinth. Now, what's really cool about the Bible is we get to read the story in Acts chapter 18, but later on, we get to know what actually happened after Paul's ministry. Paul spent about 1.5 years there preaching the gospel. People get saved. A church started. And later on in Paul's life, as he leaves and he's traveling other places, he begins to write letters to the churches he started. In fact, we know he wrote 4 letters to the Christians in Corinth. 2 of them are lost, and 2 are in the Bible. Now, Steve said he's Buffalo true and true. What do I call people who are from Buffalo? I call them Buffalonians, right? We're Buffalonians. That's who we are. And the Christians in the city of Corinth were called Corinthians. And so in the Bible, in the 1st and 2nd Corinthians, there are 2 letters that Paul later on wrote to the believers in Corinth, the church in Corinth, to instruct them, encourage them, correct them, and things like that. So what we're going to do in this time, our story is Acts chapter 18, Paul's initial visit to the city. But every once in a while, we're going to peer into the future and get more detail as we look into 1st and 2nd Corinthians to tell us more about his first journey in Corinth. All right, so we're going to start in Acts chapter 18. But first, point number 1 is this. Going takes a team. Remember, the title of the message is, what does it take to go? What does it take to go? Number 1, going takes a team. Let's start our story. Acts chapter 18, starting in verse 1, says this. Then Paul left Athens, and he went to Corinth. There he became acquainted with a Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, who had recently arrived from Italy with his wife Priscilla. They had left Italy when Claudius Caesar deported all Jews from Rome. Then verse 3 says it right here, Paul lived and worked with them, for they were tent makers just as he was. Now, why would I say going takes a team? Let me tell you why. Going takes a team because the greatest missionary ever, the Apostle Paul, the resurrected Jesus appeared to him. He did many miracles. He was the greatest church planter, missionary to ever live. He needed a team to go. If the Apostle Paul needed the team to go, we need a team to go. And he gets to the city of Corinth. And the first thing that happened with Paul is that God linked him up with Aquila and Priscilla. The cool thing about this married couple is that they were Jews just like Paul. They were Christians just like Paul. And they had the same trade as tent makers or leather workers just like Paul. This is amazing because the city of Corinth, it wasn't a Jewish city, it was a Greek city. So they were the minority, yet he connected with people who were like him. And also, it's widely accepted that Aquila and Priscilla were Christians before they met Paul, because if Paul converted them, definitely Luke, who wrote down the book of Acts, he would have wrote of their conversion, so they were Christians. And lastly, they all did the same trade. And so Paul is living with these people and working with these people. And here's what I want you to see. in order for Paul to be successful in his mission, the first thing he established was a team, a family, friends, people he could live with, work with, fellowship with, and be encouraged with. In fact, if we look back at those letters that later on Paul wrote to Corinthians, right? In 1 Corinthians, Paul actually talks about what it was like for him to first come to Corinth. And this is what it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 3. This is Paul talking. He says, I came to you. When did he come to him? Acts chapter 18, he came to Corinth. I came to you in weakness, with great fear and trembling. Paul is saying, when I first came to you, right, in Acts chapter 18, I was scared. I was trembling. I was nervous. I didn't know what I was going to do. And what was the first thing that happened? He met Aquila and Priscilla, Jews like him, Christians like him, people like him who he could live with and work with because he was scared, but he had a mission God called him to do, so he wasn't going to quit. And he found people who were like him. He found a team of people who could encourage him and strengthen him and help him to do what God had called him to do. It's so important we have other believers and Christians and church friends to help us in our lives. Probably why Hebrews 10:25 says this, and let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now. Especially now, with the world the way it is, and the craziness happening, and the tragedies, especially now, we need to meet together to encourage one another because we got a mission. God's called us to do something. There's people in the city who need Jesus, and we have to have a team of people. Going takes a team. Now, of course, we don't want to be inward focused. We don't want to forget about reaching people because we're only hanging out with people like us. Right? We don't want to create a church or a church culture that excludes non-Christians. You know that is not my heart. I'm all about reaching people. But at the same time, we will never last and be able to go like God has called us to go if we don't have a team of people around us. If we're not meeting together, encouraging each other. Going takes a team. And as you go to work, as you pick up your kids from school, as you go through your life, we all need Priscillas and Aquilas to encourage us and to help us. I'm so thankful that me and my wife, we both have our own Priscillas and Aquilas to encourage us in our lives. In fact, most recently, we just had our third daughter. She's a little over 3 months old. Her name's Hannah. She's healthy. She's amazing. But how, the birth happened, it was tragic. Nikki's life, the baby's life was kind of all at stake. It was tragic. And after the baby was born, I just personally had a really hard time adjusting to life. Okay, I'm just being honest. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I just wasn't myself. I was just very kind of mean and short patience with my kids and grouchy. And it was just rough. You know what I mean? You're going through your day, but you're just not who you are. And I was struggling. So one day my wife, she starts texting my friends. And all of a sudden, my friends are calling me. My friends are taking me out to eat. Why? Because they're there for me. Because going takes a team. Anytime there's something in the news about a pastor leaving the ministry or a pastor committing suicide or these tragedies that happen, people call me. They check in on me. How am I doing? Why do we need that? Why do people do that? Because I need to be encouraged, and so do you. Because God has called us to go and to reach people. And going takes a team. Let us not neglect our meeting together so we can encourage each other. Going takes a team. I love this proverb. It says, 18:24 says, there are friends who destroy each other. I love it, friends in quotation marks. But a real friend sticks closer than a brother. Man, that's what we need in our life. Going takes a team, and we need real friends who could stick with us and say, man, we're on a mission. God's called us to do something. It may be tough. It may be difficult, but I'm here with you. I'm praying for you. You could cry on my shoulder, and we're going to do what God has called us to do. We need a team. Going takes a team, just like 8 Days of Hope. The amazing things they do, the amazing work they do, they don't do it by themselves. They do it with a team of people. That's why we should sign up and be a part of their team. It's also why we pray almost every week. We pray for other churches in Western New York. Why? Because it's not about us. It's about God's church in Western New York, and it's going to take a team of churches to reach Western New York for Christ. And it's also why we financially support so many missionaries globally and around the world and internationally and locally. Because it takes a team. We can't do it by ourselves. And so we support these missionaries through Global Outreach Go, our missionaries, our mission program to reach more people. What does it take to go? Number one, going takes a team. Number two, going takes resources. Going takes resources. Let's go back to our story. We finished on verse 3, right? And it said Paul's living with Aquila and Priscilla. They're working as tent makers. Verse 4, it says this. Each Sabbath found Paul at the synagogue trying to convince the Greeks, the Jews and Greeks alike. Each Sabbath, let's just stop there. Each Sabbath, that's one day a week, Paul was preaching the gospel. One day a week, he was preaching the gospel. How do we know that? Because the other days of the week, he was working as a tent maker. It says each Sabbath, and he was working as a tent maker. We know what he was doing one day a week. Verse 5 says this, and after Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, Paul spent all his time preaching the word. He testified to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. Paul went from each Sabbath, one day a week, to all his time preaching the word. What happened? How did this transition take place in Paul's life from one day a week to all his time? Well, what does the verse say? The verse says, when Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, something changed in Paul's life. When they came down, they supplied what Paul needed so he could stop as a tent maker and spend all his time preaching the gospel. In fact, years later, Paul is writing this letter to the church in Corinth, to the Corinthians, and he's recounting this specific time in his letter. And this is what he says in 2 Corinthians 11:9. He says, and when I was with you and didn't have enough to live on, I did not become a financial burden to anyone. For the brothers who came down from Macedonia, what did we just read in verse 5 in Acts, right? When Silas and Timothy, the brothers, where'd they come from? Macedonia. When the brothers came down from Macedonia, they brought me all that I needed. I've never been a burden to you, and I never will be. Who brought him what he needed? The brothers, Silas and Timothy, when they came down from Macedonia. What did they bring? They provided financially and other things. How do you know it was financially? Well, first of all, Paul says it. He goes, I was never a financial burden to you. But also, he stopped working so he could spend all his time preaching the word. For 7 years of my life, this was my story. See, I went to school. I got a degree in financial analysis. I was a financial advisor. I didn't just have a job. I had a career as a financial advisor. I was good, and I loved it. But all my spare time, my vacation time, my weekends, I spent preaching the word. When I could, I was preaching the word. One day, God had a stirring in my heart to leave my career and become a full-time missionary. So I left my job, and I became a full-time missionary working for Basic, a college ministry. And the thing about Basic is we don't charge college students, mainly because they don't have any money, but also because we don't want to charge the people we were trying to reach. And so how did I get money? Well, what I did was I raised up a team of people, of Christians, of brothers and sisters, of churches who supported me financially on a monthly basis, supplying all of my needs so I could reach people for Jesus, so I didn't burden the very people we were trying to reach. You see, it's the church who gives to missionaries so they can preach the gospel free of charge. We don't want to burden the very people we're called to reach, and so we have this beautiful thing called the body of Christ, God's church. And we give to these ministries, we give to these people so they could devote all their time preaching the word free of charge. Just like 8 Days of Hope. They're helping 100 families in the Fillmore district. They're not being a burden to them. How do they do 63 million, whatever it was, in work? That's impossible. Why? Because God's family is huge. And people are giving so they could spend all their time reaching people for Jesus. Yes, there are resources needed to go. That's why we raise money for global outreach, to give to ministries like 8 Days of Hope, to give to the 28, 29 other ministries and missions organizations we reach. I want to encourage you, sign up for 8 Days of Hope. I want to encourage you, serve somewhere in church. Serve at another ministry. I don't care. Serve. Do something. But I also want to encourage you to consider giving something extra to our global outreach. To check out all the ministries, you go to lovejoy.org/go. Go right there, see all the ministries we support, and you could set up giving. You could tell us what you plan on doing over the next 12 months. What do you plan on, if you could give maybe on a monthly? Me and my wife, we just give reoccurring. It's super easy to give so we could advance. Our goal is to raise $5,000 a month. $5,000 a month so we could give out every month to these missionaries all over the world and locally right here making a difference, preaching the gospel. What does it take to go? Number one, it takes going. Going takes a team. Number two, going takes resources. And number three, going takes perseverance. So we just read in verse 5, right? Paul switched. He spent all his time preaching the word. Verse 6 says this, but when they opposed and insulted him, Paul shook the dust from his clothes and said, your blood is upon your own heads. I am innocent. From now on, I will go to preach to the Gentiles. Now think about this. Silas and Timothy, they come down from Macedonia, and they bring Paul all he needs. Now Paul is spending all his time preaching the word. He doesn't have to build tents or work with leather. He could just preach the gospel. If I were Paul, I'd be like, man, now we're about to roll. Things are about to happen. The church is going to grow. People are going to get saved. We're going to be baptizing people. We're going to be building buildings, right? I'm ready to rock and roll. All my time is preaching the word. And what happens? He's opposed and he's insulted. Doesn't happen like he thinks it's going to happen. Things supposed to get better, they get drastically worse. In fact, he's opposed and insulted so much in the synagogue that he has to leave the synagogue and go next door and begin to preach to the non-Jews or Gentiles, as they say it. Going takes perseverance. It's going to take determination. It's going to take persistence. It's going to take some tenacity to reach that person in your office, to reach your children, your parents, your neighbors, your friends. It's going to take perseverance. It's not going to be easy. When you think things should get better and they get worse, that doesn't mean to give up. That means to keep on going. Going takes perseverance. I believe right now, personally, in my family, and even some things behind the scenes in the church, we're going through a real time, a real season of perseverance. In fact, me and my wife were just talking the other day, and she said this might have been the hardest year of our life. Yet, in the same sense, it was the year we've seen God provide the most of us, the most for us that we've ever seen. Going takes perseverance. I tell my wife on some really tough days, where we feel like we're asked to give more than we were prepared to give, I say, you know what? We're on a mission. And we're going to do something great, no matter what it costs us. I tell my wife, I tell the team at Lovejoy all the time, you could ask them, don't give up because we're on the verge of something awesome happening in Western New York. I can see it all the time. It's not time to give up, church. It's time to persevere because going takes perseverance. It's going to take a little tenacity. It's going to take a little determination, but it's not time to quit because things get difficult. I love what James says, chapter 1, verse 2. He says this, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Consider it pure joy. Let me say it this way, when you're facing trials with your kids. Consider it joy when you're facing difficulties with your family. Consider it joy when you're just trying to love on your coworkers and things just keep getting worse and worse and worse. Consider it joy when you're struggling at your job, when you're struggling with your finances, when you're trying to be kind to your neighbors and they're nothing but mean back to you. Consider it joy when culture seems to be opposing everything the church stands for. Consider it joy. Why? Because verse 3 tells us, because you know that the testing of your faith produces something that we need to go. It produces perseverance. When our faith is tested, when we face difficulties, when you're trying to tell others about Jesus and you accidentally get in an argument with them and now things are worse. When you're trying to raise your kids and you just keep losing your patience. When you're trying to live with integrity and every time you do, something worse happens. We have to remember that the testing of our faith, Romans says this another way, they say the suffering, our problems, our trials, they produce something we need. They produce perseverance, the very thing we need to go. Then verse 4 says this, and let perseverance finish its work. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Going takes perseverance. It takes hard work, and we cannot quit. We will reach thousands in Western New York. We will, I'm telling you, we will reach many people in Western New York. We will see more family, more friends, more neighbors, more co-workers come to Christ. But it's not going to be easy. It's going to take some perseverance. It's going to take some tenacity. It's going to take some patience. And we cannot quit when it gets tough. Because look what happened to Paul after he was opposed and insulted. As the band comes back up, let's start to finish our story, verse 7 and 8, back to Paul in Corinth. He left them, right? He's opposed, he's insulted. Verse 7 says, then he left and went to the home of Titius Justus, a Gentile who worshiped God and lived next door to the synagogue. Crispus, the leader of the synagogue, and everyone in his household believed in the Lord. Many others in Corinth also heard Paul, became believers, and were baptized. Paul persevered, and many people became believers. The gospel was spread, but it took a team. Paul with Aquila, Priscilla, Silas, and Timothy were a part of that team. It took a team, it took resources, and it took perseverance. The truth is, there are many people out there who need to hear the gospel. I was telling you last week about a ministry we support called the Church Planting Initiative and how they estimate that 1 million people in Western New York don't even attend an evangelical church of some sort in our area. There are people right here who you live with, who you work with, who you go to the park with, who you meet when you're picking up your kids from daycare. There are people right here who need to hear Jesus, and we can't do it alone. We need a team of people. You need to be encouraged. You need to have people you can rely on to love you. Don't neglect us meeting together, but encourage each other. It's going to take resources, and it's going to take perseverance. If it takes perseverance, it means it's not easy. It means it's going to take time. How much more important is it to have a team of people knowing that it's going to take perseverance? Man, we need those people to encourage us. We need to encourage and strengthen each other as we go to work, as we raise our kids, as we have temptations, as we experience trials of many kinds. Because we need to let perseverance finish its work. I pray all the time, God, what are you developing in me, and why is it taking so long? Will you just finish your work in me already? But we just need to let it do its work. We got a mission. Me and my wife, we got a mission. We're going to do what we're called to do. I hope it goes quicker than I think, but we're just going to keep going. I want to finish the story in Acts. We're going to read verses 8, 9, and 10. It says this as we finish the story. One night, the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision, and he told him this. Remember, people are coming to Christ. The church is being built. People are being baptized. And Paul has this vision. It says, don't be afraid. Speak out. Don't be silent, for I am with you, and no one will attack and harm you. Here it is. For many people in this city belong to me. Many people in this city belong to Jesus. In fact, I'm just going to ask you just to stand to your feet. We're going to sing a song declaring this over our city, that many people in this city, in Buffalo, in Western New York, they belong to Jesus. They just don't know it yet. And it's our job to go. It's our job to love them, to serve them, to lead them so they can know Jesus. It's going to take a team. It's going to take resources. It's going to take some perseverance. But you better not give up on me, because we're going to reach these people. And the thing we need most of all is we need Jesus. We need a lot of Jesus. Lord, we just worship you and we thank you. People in the